Yang spoke earlier to Wenjie Chen, who is the Deputy Division Chief in the IMF Africa's department. He started their conversation by exploring why economic growth rates in the region are insufficient to meet the government's needs.
That compared to pre-pandemic growth rates, unfortunately, it's not where the countries in the region should be in order to catch up in terms of their income convergence. And expensive, what we mean by that, or the pricey recovery, is, of course, the much hyped about return to the international debt market, led by Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, and Benin in terms of the issuance of Eurobonds earlier this year. However, the borrowing costs are very much still elevated. Therefore, this is a pricey recovery in that sense that this is not back to normal yet.
Indeed, and just for context for our viewers, like in Kenya's case, the 2024 Eurobond that we are refinancing, that had a coupon rate of 6.75%, but the 2031 note that partially refinanced, it was at 9.5%, so an increase of nearly 300 basis points on those two. The fund also argues, though, that the way in which sub-Saharan governments are reducing their deficits, and I'm quoting the report here, could be improved, with a focus specifically, though, on raising revenues. And yes, to be fair, tax GDP ratios across the region in some countries quite low. Nigeria certainly comes to mind. But where would extra revenues come from, given how informal a lot of these economies are?
That's an excellent question. By raising domestic revenues, we not only just apply a mean here in terms of raising taxes. What we really implying here is that we need to broaden the tax base. And how do we do that? There are a couple of ways, which one of them is foremost simplifying the tax system that is in place. If you imagine for many of the informal economy agents, as you said, maybe it's too hard to even understand what some of the tax obligations are. So simplifying the code would help in order to meet those obligations. Another one is to close loopholes, many of the very expensive exemptions that are part of the tax system. So that's part of the efforts to broaden the tax base, but also other things include increasing the compliance, which could be done by segments. You can imagine doing it for smaller businesses, medium versus the larger ones, which all have different type of compliance issues. And then lastly, it's leveraging technology, digitalization in particular, that can really increase the efficiency of the internal tax systems, of the interface with the taxpayers. And in the case of Ethiopia, for instance, this was done by the introduction of the electronic cash registry and then machines.
And one of the things that you point out in the accompanying notes to this report is that it's not just about all the technical things that governments can do, right? Making it easier for people to pay their taxes, have clarity on where exactly the money is going. But the report also focused on rebuilding trust between governments and taxpayers, because if you're going to tell people, look, we need to raise tax revenue, in this sort of environment that we have at the moment, the reaction usually is, no, why would I give you more money?
Absolutely. So in our accompanying regional economic outlook note that specifically focused on the topic of fiscal adjustment without undermining development, there we go into much more detail. And one of the recommendations is that really for the authorities also to build trust with the population. And there what we mean by that is to have very clear communications about the goals, about the time plan, about the exact measures of how to go about the domestic mobilization of revenues. And there also to be very transparent and to show that the government has the integrity of using each dime that it gets in a very responsibly and efficient way and not wasting anything as well.
Given the way that debt negotiations have taken place in Zambia's case, or rather debt renegotiations have taken place in Zambia's case, we're seeing this sort of play out as well in Ghana. Should the IMF be an arbiter in these disputes that we're seeing emerge between bilateral creditors on one hand and commercial ones on the other? Because that certainly held up talks on Zambia for quite a while. So what do we need to do to the common framework to resolve that problem before it comes up again?
Well, the fund's position has always been that we do not assess comparability of treatment nor do we comment, in fact, on the adequacy of comparability of treatment criteria, which is really under the purview of the Official Creditors Committee, the OCC. And as you mentioned, on the latest in Zambia's case, the OCC noted that the agreement in principle with the steering committee of the Eurobond holders announced on March 25th, 2024, met comparability of treatment. In general, as to the G20 framework, as you mentioned, I think we have seen improvements in terms of the time that it takes to resolve some of these cases, and they have improved overall, but more discussions and more needs to be done, and definitely to make it even easier to go forward.